Hi everyone, and welcome back again. My name is Sharon and I'm so happy that you're studying with me again today. This is our third video in a series of videos about English verb tenses and aspects. And today we're actually going to see how we start combining tense and aspect together. Today is all about combinations. So what I want to emphasize here is that I'm going to show you what happens when we link up verb tense with verb aspect. And I'll point out the similarities and the differences between these different combinations as we go along to help you understand the logic behind how these verbs come together. There are very clear pieces of evidence when we look at a verb so we can tell what tense and what aspect it has. All right. So to review, our simple aspect doesn't tell us if the action is complete or it's ongoing. It just tells us that the action exists or existed in the past or will exist in the future. Okay, so just a reminder of what it means. Now let's look at the form. So starting with simple present, maybe it's better I'm over here. Simple present is the first verb tense that you probably ever learned. And all it is adding s if you have the third person singular, or it's just using the base form of the verb with no s on it. So I walk, they walk, you walk, we walk, but when you have he, she, it, or another singular subject, you have an s on it. So it becomes he walks. Now think about what you know about the past tense. Can you make a guess about what the simple looks like in the past tense? So I'm going to put myself over here. And our past tense is just taking the verb and adding ed on the end. And that's for regular verbs. Irregular verbs have all different kinds of forms. And that's another lesson. So today we're focusing on regular verbs. So it's he walked. Okay. And with future, the way it looks different is we add will. Will, as you'll learn, is actually a modal. It's a modal verb, and when we put it together with the base form of a verb, we create the future tense. And so it becomes he will walk. Okay? So that's just the simple aspect. Now let's look at the perfect. So again, perfect aspect tells us that the action is complete. When we combine tense and aspect together, tense tells us when the action was completed, and aspect tells us how complete, whether it's completed or ongoing or a combination of complete and ongoing. Okay, so present perfect has a form that looks like this. It is have or has plus the past participle. Okay, so I want to point out here that in these verbs, have and has, if you were going to write have in the present, it would look like have or has, right? It wouldn't look like had. That's past. Okay, so present perfect, we see that the present is on the have verb. That's how we can tell it's present perfect and not past perfect. And then after that, we have the past participle of the main verb. So for example, if our main verb is walk, right? To put it together, I will say, let's use he. He has, because it's he has walked. a long time, just to complete the sentence in a meaningful way. He has walked a long time. If I were going to change it to I would say I have walked a long time. And so what we see here is that here is where we have the present, and it's also where we have agreement with the subject. We don't have agreement here. Agreement happens on have or has, okay? And then this part is called past participle. All that past participle means is that we took the verb and we added ed to the end. All right, so let's compare this with past perfect. Oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't even see that. Let me make myself go away. All right, so past perfect, the only thing that's different is that instead of have and has, we have had. Okay, so here is where we see past. And after past, then we have our past participle. So if I'm going to make this sentence into past perfect, I would say he had walked a long time. Now, here's a question for you. How would past perfect look different if I use I? Would it look any different? So let's try it out. Oops, go back one. I had walked a long time. Sorry, there we go. He had walked and I had walked. Notice that those are the same in the past perfect. There's no difference in form here. The difference in form happens in the present perfect. Now, what happens when we look at the future perfect? So future perfect with regular or irregular verbs, I'll point out, is that you have will, have, plus the past participle. So again, if I'm going to use walked and say he will have and then walked a long time. Okay, now what happens when I put it in I? It's going to look the same. I will have walked a long time. So again, you will only see agreement on your verb in the present. You will not see agreement for the past perfect or the future perfect. Okay? All right, so the perfect aspect has two key parts. I'm going to summarize down here. You're going to have a form of have, okay, and that's going to have our tense. And the second part is the past participle. That summarizes the perfect aspect, okay? Have will have the tense, and the past participle will look the same in all three forms. All right, so let's take a look now at progressive aspect. So as a reminder, progressive aspect tells us that the action is ongoing or incomplete. When we combine the tense with that, it tells us when the action happened, and the aspect tells us how complete the action was. And I want to emphasize here that it is possible to talk about a past action, but look at it as an ongoing one. So if we want to talk about process or looking at something as it's happening, then the progressive aspect makes sense. So let's take a look at what these verbs look like. So in the present progressive, you have the be verb. Notice that am, is, and are a form of the be verb. And you have a present participle. Okay, so you take be and it will look differently depending on what the subject is. So if I want to say he is reading a book. Okay, now if I'm going to say I, it's going to be I am reading a book. So here it's clear that the be verb is agreeing with the subject. Okay? Notice that reading looks the same. It does not change depending on who the subject is. All right? Now let's compare it to the past progressive. So in the past progressive for regular verbs, you see was and were, and the present participle again. So in the present, it's am, is, or are. Well, this again is the be verb, and the past form of the be verb is was or were. Okay? And then we add the present participle. So let's take our example of he is reading a book. Let's make it past progressive. So it would be he was reading a book. Okay? Now, if we want to say I, what would it be? Not were. I also was reading a book. Da, 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 da. But the were comes when we say like they or you or we. Okay? So that's the difference between present and past. The difference we see is on that be verb. So be carries the tense. Be is going to tell us when the action happened. So keep that in mind as we look at future progressive. So in future progressive, we also have a form of be, and we have the present participle, and we have will. The difference is that this be here, this is not going to have a tense on it. And the reason for that is will carries the tense. Will tells us future. And so we don't need to change be at all. So let's take our example. He will be reading a book. Sorry that those don't look like three separate words. And the same is true for other subjects too. I will be reading a book, they will be reading a book, you will be reading a book. And our last aspect that we're going to look at is how perfect and progressive come together. So we have present perfect progressive, past perfect progressive, and future perfect progressive. And as we'll see, we have little bits of evidence of both perfect and progressive within these tenses. As a reminder, when we bring these aspects together of perfect and progressive, we have that idea that an action started and continued for a period of time before it was completed. So let's take a look at what those look like. So for irregular verbs, we have or has plus been plus the present participle. So it might look like something like this. He has been learning something for a period of time. When I change it to I, it says I have been learning. So again, when we compare it with the other aspects, we still see that have or has agrees with the subject. But what's different is that we have two parts that are the same. The been and the learning stay the same. Present participle doesn't change and been doesn't change. But we reflect, we choose which have or has depending on the subject. So again, this is going to carry our tense. Now think about past perfect progressive. There we only have had plus been plus present participle. Just like in the other tenses, there's only one way to show past tense on the verb have, and that's with had. So it's going to look the same. He had been learning. And I had been learning. Same thing. Okay, and then with future perfect, for regular and irregular verbs, there's lots of different parts here. We still have will, and we have, and we have been, and the present participle, okay? And all of these are the same no matter what the subject is. He will have been learning, I will have been learning, they will have been learning. They're all the same, okay? And again, what we're seeing is little pieces of the perfect aspect and little pieces of the progressive aspect, right? And so you can see evidence of how the aspect and tense are coming together to create these combinations. All right, I know that was a lot to think about. Thanks for hanging in there, and I'll see you next time as we go over a table that compares all of these together in one easy place. See you then.